In 1937, as the guns of the Second Sino-Japanese War roared, opening one of the most tragic chapters in human history, the city of Nanjing became the epicenter of horror. The Japanese army, already preparing to ally with Nazi Germany, descended upon China with brutal intent, transforming Nanjing into a bloody battlefield. The horrific massacre claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, from children to the elderly, in an event forever etched as a painful mark in Chinese history. Amidst this chaotic and brutal scene, an extraordinary individual rose as a beacon of humanity: John Rabe. A German businessman and the director of Siemens China Company, what made Rabe unique was not only his courage, but also his puzzling position. As a member of the Nazi Party, he should have been supporting his future ally, Japan. Yet, Rabe chose an opposing path, risking his own safety to protect over 200,000 Chinese civilians seeking refuge. The haunting question remains: what compelled a Nazi to stand against his own faction to protect the very people their allies aimed to destroy? Born in Hamburg in 1882, John Rabe spent most of his adult life dedicated to his beloved China. In 1937, as war erupted and the threat from the Japanese military loomed ever closer to Nanjing, most foreign officials, including Germans and Americans, hastily departed. However, Rabe chose to stay. His deep conviction that fleeing would turn the Nazi Party, an organization he believed supported the poor, into hypocrites, kept him rooted in the maelstrom of war. From September to November 1937, Rabe not only protected his employees, but also documented details of bombings and air raid shelters in his diary. Surprisingly, he maintained his composure, enjoying cups of tea and fostering close friendships with the Chinese citizens. As the Japanese army advanced closer to Nanjing, Rabe realized the necessity for more decisive action. Determined to save the city, Rabe joined the International Committee, a group composed mainly of American doctors and professors, whose primary goal was to find a way to protect Nanjing from the impending invasion. By the end of November, only 3 officials from the German embassy remained in China, and Rabe was entrusted with the chairmanship of the committee. Together, they proposed a revolutionary idea: to create a large safety zone covering much of Nanjing, where unarmed civilians could find refuge. Their hope was that the Japanese army would agree not to attack this area. However, hope quickly shattered. The Japanese authorities refused any written commitment, citing their inability to guarantee absolute safety if soldiers infiltrated the zone. Despite this, Rabe did not give up. He believed there were still people in Germany who would heed his pleas. In this urgent situation, he sent 2 telegrams, one to Consul General Kiel, asking him to forward Rabe's petition to Hitler, and one directly to Hitler, imploring the Japanese government's intervention to establish a neutral zone for non-combatants. Regrettably, no reply was ever received. At the same time, Rabe received orders from the embassy to leave Nanjing, but with rare steadfastness, he politely but firmly refused, reiterating his intention to stay and protect over 200,000 innocent non-combatants. By November 27th, Nanjing's city gates were closed. The safety zone was officially established, and Rabe, along with his committee, began comprehensive management, including providing medicine, food, and transport. A week later, air raids commenced, forcing thousands of Chinese civilians to pour into the safety zone. John Rabe and his colleagues were trapped amidst the political maneuvers of various countries, but they diligently continued to funnel supplies into the area, despite falling bombs and the growing threat from ground troops. On December 5th, although the safety zone was pledged for refugees only, General Tong, the city's defense commander, greeted Rabe from a house within the zone. 5 days later, Japanese radio coldly announced that Nanjing would soon fall. A diary entry by a Mr. Smith recorded the scene of over 1,000 deaths in one night at the city's south gate, and hundreds more within the safety zone itself. Subsequent entries described the horror of brutal, uncontrolled attacks by soldiers against civilians. Bodies littered the streets, and Rabe frequently encountered violent scenes that filled him with dread. At one point, he attempted to negotiate with the Japanese, asking if Chinese soldiers, if they abandoned their arms, would be treated fairly. The grim answer he received was no. When Japanese soldiers surged into the safety zone on December 13th, Rabe's diaries were filled with stories of the daily atrocities he witnessed. As the death toll mounted, so too did the staggering numbers of women violently attacked within the safety zone and across the city. Looting became widespread, not only by Japanese soldiers, but also by some Chinese soldiers. However, amidst the pages filled with horror, there were moments where humanity shone brightly. Rabe recounted how he and his American colleagues drove off Japanese soldiers simply by their presence. His garden became a refuge for over 300 displaced people, who considered his house the safest spot in Nanjing. He personally removed Japanese invaders from his home and resolutely protected those who had sought shelter under his wing. Rabe admitted that for him, this was significantly easier than for the Americans, as he merely needed to point to his swastika armband and shout Deutsch, German, or Hitler to make them flee. On Christmas Eve, 1937, his diary simply stated, "I do not regret having stayed on here, for my presence has saved many lives, but my suffering is indescribable nonetheless." Throughout the Nanjing massacre and the city's devastation, Rabe and others continuously documented what they witnessed. For his part, Rabe seemed sure that those outside China were unaware of the horrific scale of the atrocities unfolding. By mid-January 1938, Nanjing had been completely leveled and successfully captured by the Japanese. Rabe believed that no one remained outside the 200,000-strong safety zone, and those within continued to struggle with food shortages and relentless violent attacks from soldiers. On February 8th, the Japanese and the Autonomous Government Committee announced the end of the invasion and the immediate disbandment of the safety zone. Rabe told those who had taken refuge in his garden that he would never force them to leave, but he could do little to protect them if the Japanese arrived in force to expel them. Ultimately, the true death toll of the Nanjing massacre remains unknown. Rabe estimated around 50,000 to 60,000 fatalities, but modern sources place the number much higher, estimating between 200,000 and 300,000 lives lost. He departed Nanjing on February 23rd, hailed as a hero by its residents, beloved by the refugees he saved, and known by the nickname, the Buddha of Nanjing. He never stopped thinking about what he had witnessed, writing to Hitler once more, and enclosing a copy of a lecture he gave, recounting the truth of what he had seen in Nanjing. However, He also claimed these records were solely for documentation and not for public consumption. Later in life, Rabe was arrested by the Gestapo and the Soviets on separate occasions, though both times he was released without incident. While mentions of Hitler or the Nazi Party were scarce throughout his diaries, when they did appear, he always wrote of them commandingly and with a surface-level air of approval. However, after that period, he rarely spoke of Hitler or the Nazi Party again. His biographer later concluded that he had no interest in them or their politics. Whether this was due to the response during and after Nanjing remains an enigma. In the final years of the war, Rabe found himself in Berlin, impoverished and living in his son-in-law's spare room, a pariah in Germany, the consequence of saving the lives of the enemy. John Rabe died of a stroke in Berlin on January 5, 1950. However, his legacy lives on, with monuments to his bravery in both Germany and China. For John Rabe, his choice was never about Hitler's shining vision, Nazi Party ideology, or being a member. It wasn't even about being German. It all essentially came down to a simple truth. He was a human being, and so were the victims. Bound by that shared humanity and his love for the people of Nanjing, he simply could not leave them behind. His actions stemmed entirely from the heart, bearing no relation to any embellished heroism.